Imagine being only 16 years old and suddenly becoming the Queen of England. It sounds like a fairy tale, but for Lady Jane Grey, it was reality, albeit with a tragic end. You may know her as the Queen who only reigned for 9 days, but few people have considered that behind this short and painful story lies a whole host of little-known facts. How did she come to the throne? Why did her reign end so quickly and tragically? And most importantly, why is her life still the subject of intense scrutiny by historians centuries later? In this video, we reveal some unexpected and little-known facts about Lady Jane Grey that will change your perception of this legendary figure. We'll discuss how she was put on the throne as a political puppet who didn't want power, why her death led to a real cultural surge of interest, and how her tragic fate came to symbolize a victim of political intrigue. We'll also take a closer look at her education and the amazing talents that set her apart from other queens. Prepare to learn more about her life than you ever imagined and understand why her figure became important not only in her own time, but for centuries to come. Jane Grey is the 9-day Queen of England. Like Marina Mishuk, the wife of the Russian impostor ruler, false Dmitry I, the English Queen Jane Grey only sat on the throne for 9 days. Jane was on the throne in part because she was the great-niece of Henry VIII, the notorious king who executed his wives. Her maternal grandmother was Mary Tudor, Henry's famous sister, who had deliberately married his friend the Duke of Suffolk. The succession of Edward VI and the struggle for the throne. After the death of Henry VIII in 1547, his only son, Edward VI, who was only 9 years old when he ascended the throne, succeeded to the throne of England. Edward was the heir to the throne because Henry VIII had left no other living legitimate children. His daughters Mary and Elizabeth were both of age at the time, but could not inherit the throne in their father's line because of their mothers, Mary Tudor, Catholic background, and Henry VIII marriage to Anne Boleyn, Elizabeth's mother. The early death of Edward VI. Edward VI did not reign for long. He died on 6 July 1553, before he was 16 years old. His reign was painfully short, but despite his young age, he left a remarkable mark on English history. Edward was a Protestant monarch, and this influenced his policies as he sought to strengthen and preserve Protestantism in England, rejecting Catholic traditions imposed by his father, Henry VIII. Edward's succession and the struggle for the throne. Edward VI had no children, and at the time of his death, there was an acute problem of who would succeed him. While still alive, Edward made a will that changed the usual order of succession. Traditionally, the eldest heir should have succeeded the king, but in this case, the situation was a little more complicated. Edward did not want England to revert the Catholic faith after his death, as his father Henry VIII had once broken with Rome and founded the Anglican Church. Edward was strongly opposed to the restoration of Catholicism in the country, which might have been possible with the accession of his half-sister, the Catholic Mary Tudor, daughter of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon. Realizing the danger of a Catholic revival, Edward will put Mary aside and named a Protestant woman, his niece Jane Grey, as his heir. Jane was the daughter of the Duke of Suffolk and, like Edward, held Protestant beliefs, making her a convenient choice to support the country's religious policies. Reasons for choosing Jane Grey. Edward VI chose Jane Grey because she was a direct relative on his father's side and also a strong symbol of Protestantism. Edward was too ill to reform, but hoped that Jane, if she became queen, would carry on his cause and ensure that England remained free of the Catholic counter-reformation. Jane Grey was a young and educated woman, but her appointment to the throne was partly a political move, as she was supported not only by Edward, but also by supporters of the Reformation in England, including influential nobles. Edward's will and his decision to choose Jane Grey in place of her sister Mary thus created an inevitable political storm, as Mary, although a Catholic, was far more popular with the people, and her claim to the throne could not be easily denied. Young Queen Jane Grey. Despite her youth, Jane Grey was a truly exceptional person, destined to make her mark on English history. From childhood, she possessed striking qualities of character and attractiveness that attracted the attention of others. Appearance and upbringing. Jane was described as a charming girl with a splendid figure and luxuriant brown hair. Her appearance was attractive, but Jane's true value lay not only in her looks, but also in her thorough education and outstanding intellectual ability. At the age of 10 or 11, she was sent to live with her uncle, Thomas Seymour, to continue her education under his tutelage. This was an important time in Jane's life, as it was here that she learned many of the skills and knowledge that would play a key role in her future. Thomas Seymour was the brother of Jane Seymour, Henry the Eighth's third wife, and because of this connection, he was one of the most influential people at the English court. He also became the husband of Henry the Eighth's widow, Catherine Parr, which further enhanced his status and ability to influence politics. Under his tutelage, Jane received not only an academic but also a social education, which allowed her to interact with the most important people of the time. However, this period was not entirely fortunate for her. When Thomas Seymour was accused of treason and executed, Jane returned to her father's house where she continued her education. Education and talents. Jane received one of the finest educations of her time. She was fluent in several languages from an early age. She spoke Latin and Greek, languages that at the time were considered basic for educated people who knew classical culture. Jane also knew Spanish, Hebrew, and even ancient Babylonian, which was an incredible achievement for a girl of her time. This education was not limited to the humanities. She also had a high level of training in music, literature, and dance, which was a must for well-bred ladies of the time. Of course, Jane was not only an intellectual, but also possessed excellent manners and charm. Her dancing skills and social behavior attracted attention and created her image as a refined and cultured person. However, this did not prevent her from being a cheerful and happy girl. According to surviving memories, she was not only intelligent, but also kind, with a light and cheerful character, which added to her popularity. Eager for knowledge and fond of freedom. For all her merits and thirst for knowledge, Jane was not as obedient a student as her strict tutors might have expected. She repeatedly broke the strict rules and restrictions placed upon her. There is evidence that, despite her deep interest in science and intellectual development, she could easily escape from a boring lesson and go to hunting parties or entertaining events. This shows her lively nature, her ability to combine intellectual pursuits with a desire to enjoy life. Thus, Jane was not only highly educated, but also an intelligent and kind girl, with refined manners and charisma, who could be both a serious student and a carefree, fun-loving teenager. These qualities would play an important role in her future, and her reputation as an intelligent and well-mannered woman attracted the attention of many influential people of the time. The politics and private life of Jane Grey. Even before she became queen, Jane was not considered the most enviable bride in England. One of her admirers was Lord Hertford, the eldest son of the Protector, who courted her. Thomas Seymour, who wooed Jane for King Edward VI. However, Jane's marriage to the king did not work out. Edward adored his great niece, but still felt only kinship love for her. Jane's husband eventually became the youngest son of the Duke of Northumberland, Guildford Dudley. Grey married him 4 months before she became Queen of England. Jane's husband was only a year older than her, but even at that age, the young rogue had a reputation as a drunkard, libertine, and debaucher. Jane did not want to marry Guildford, but he was in love with her and promised to give up his debauchery. The influence of the Duke of Northumberland. The Duke of Suffolk's decision to marry his daughter to the Duke of Northumberland's heir was fatal for Jane. The beautiful girl might have lived a long and happy life, but Northumberland Senior was hungry for power. It was his father-in-law who played a major role in Jane's accession to the throne. During Edward's illness, the Duke of Northumberland was constantly at his bedside. The courtiers noticed that the king's health began to deteriorate after his appearance at the palace. Perhaps it was a coincidence. Nevertheless, many suspected that the Duke of Northumberland was involved in Edward's worsening illness. It is believed that the decision to make Jane Queen of England was not made without the Duke's influence. Jane was intelligent, beautiful, and educated, but that was clearly not enough to hold the throne in England at that time. As the young granddaughter of Henry VII, Jane was well aware of the dangers she faced once she ascended the throne of England. According to surviving accounts, Jane fainted when it was announced that she had become queen. When she woke up, Jane was in a terrible state of hysteria, a fatal mistake and the beginning of Mary's rebellion. At court, Grey was supported as the new ruler by members of the Privy Council who did not want a Catholic Mary in power. Also in favour of Jane at the time was France, which was at war with Catholic Spain. When the court heard that Mary had raised an army and proclaimed herself queen, the council demanded that Jane raise her army as well. The young queen agreed, but made a fatal mistake. Instead of her father, the Duke of Suffolk, who was popular with the soldiers, she appointed her father-in-law, the Duke of Northumberland, to command the army. The Duke was unloved by the soldiers and hated by the petty English gentry who formed the backbone of the medieval army. All sorts of petty barons and knights in England supported the Catholic Mary. If Suffolk had ordered them to oppose Henry's daughter, they would probably have obeyed. An army commanded by the Duke of Northumberland could do Jane little good. Jane's attempts to consolidate her power. While the troops were on the march, the new Queen of England issued several decrees, the first and last of her reign. Jane ordered the minting of real silver money instead of Edward's copper money, banned the branding of beggars, and decreed that former monastic lands were to be given to the commoners for permanent use. The Queen also ordered her cronies to draw up a plan to build schools for the country's poor. All these edicts were designed to increase Jane's popularity in England, and perhaps they did. But in the aftermath, the people simply did not have time to make up their minds about the young ruler. The turning point, the army and the betrayal. On the 5th day of Jane's reign, the Duke of Northumberland set out on a campaign with his army. When Mary heard of this, she fled from Keening Hall, where she was staying at the time, a day's ride of 40 kilometers. On the way, she was almost captured by Jane's men, but a few words were enough for the popular Mary to lure the captives to her side. Northumberland slowly advanced into the east of England, taking Cambridge on the 6th day. Mary took refuge in Framlingham Castle, and the Duke sent troops to take it. But these too had gone over to Mary's side. By this time riots were breaking out in London. Jane tried to put them down, but the army had left with the Duke, and there was no one to control the rioters. With no hope of success, many members of the Privy Council turned their backs on the Queen and deserted her. By betraying her, the nobles hoped to ingratiate themselves with the popular Mary. The soldiers of Northumberland's army soon learned of the situation in London. The knights and barons immediately decided that they would not fight for a lost cause. They broke into the Duke's tent and forced him to sign a surrender. That was the end of Jane's 9-day reign. The tower where Jane was held was deserted. The cronies and servants had fled. The girl queen sat alone in a canopied chair, silently awaiting her fate. When Jane's father, the Duke of Suffolk, entered the room, she was relieved to remove her crown. The people loved Mary as the daughter of the universally adored Catherine of Aragon. But Mary turned out to be a cruel woman and a fierce Catholic fanatic. Her reign was one of the most tragic in England's history. It was not without reason that Mary was later nicknamed Bloody Mary. The fall of Jane Grey and the end of her reign. On arriving in London, Mary immediately ordered the arrest of Jane, the Duke of Northumberland and his sons, and the Duke of Suffolk and his wife. The former Queen's parents were soon released. However, the Duke and his sons were sentenced to death. Northumberland Sr. was beheaded, but his sons were pardoned. The unfortunate Jane became a prisoner in the Tower. She was tried in November. Along with her husband, Jane was found guilty of treason and sentenced to death. Mary, however, still felt a kinship with Jane and delayed the execution for a long time. The new sovereign liked the fact that Jane swore an oath to her and asked for forgiveness. Mary's return to the throne and Jane's fate. Mary wanted to forgive her niece, but further events in the country showed that Jane could still be dangerous to her. Mary's desire to return to Catholicism led to a rebellion in England in 1554. The rebels declared their intention to place a Protestant Elizabeth, Henry V. Willie's daughter by Anne Boleyn, on the throne. If Elizabeth refused, they believed Jane could become queen again. The rebellion was supported by the Duke of Suffolk. He saw it as an opportunity to get his daughter out of the Tower. The Duke marched on London with an army, but Jane was not to be free. Her father lost. In the aftermath of these events, Mary, her heart still aching, decided to have Jane executed. Perhaps the former queen would have survived. Mary offered Jane a pardon if she converted to Catholicism. But the girl, brought up in the Protestant faith, could not be persuaded to change. When Queen Mary heard that the clergyman sent to Jane had been unsuccessful, she became furious. She ordered a scaffold to be built directly under the window of her niece's cell, hoping that Jane would hear the clatter of axes and come to her senses. But the girl remained obstinate. The next day, young Jane Grey, Queen of England for 9 days, was executed. Jane Grey's execution. Jane's execution was scheduled for 12 February 1554. On the day of her death, it was decided that the girl would be beheaded, which Mary felt would be the least conspicuous and least shocking method of execution for the people. Death by beheading was considered more honorable and less cruel than other methods, such as burning at the stake. However, even such an execution was a cruel and symbolic act. Despite her youth and beauty, Jane ended up on the scaffold, a victim of political intrigue and religious conflict. Jane Grey was condemned to death for treason, even though she did not seek power herself and did not take an active part in the political struggle. She was merely a pawn in the hands of those who manipulated her fate. She remained a Protestant for the rest of her life, despite Mary's attempts to convert her to Catholicism. According to historical sources, Jane faced her death with courage, showing no fear or doubt. Some witnesses to her execution reported that she did not ask for forgiveness and went to her death calmly, accepting her fate with dignity. This won her the sympathy of those who saw her in the last days of her life. It was only many years after her execution that Jane Grey became a symbol of the innocent victim, and her fate the subject of literary and historical research. She was ruthlessly murdered for engaging in politics she neither sought nor wanted. Her tragic death has also become a reminder of the cruelty of political ambition and how easy it is to become a victim of events around you without having the power or real ability to change anything. What facts about Lady Jane Grey or other famous historical figures have surprised you? What aspects of their lives do you find most interesting? Share your thoughts in the comments, and I'll see you later.